Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Projectric webinar. Today's webinar is entitled, Is Your Project Portfolio Management Solution Driving Organizational Transformation? Thanks, everyone. We'll just jump into a few logistics on today's presentation. So the webinar will be 30 minutes. My name is Scott Jennings. I'm the CEO at Projectric, so I'll be spending the next 30 minutes with you as we go through this presentation. All of you are muted, so feel free to talk amongst yourselves and your colleagues. We will have a Q&A session at the end. You can submit questions via the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll make sure that we leave some time for those at the end. Try to keep this as interactive as a webinar can be. So in addition to the Q&A session, there's a couple of poll questions relevant to the topic at hand that will solicit some feedback. I think one we'll do in the beginning, and then one we'll save a little bit closer to the end of the presentation today. And then finally, this webinar is recorded. Recorded version will be available typically about 30 minutes after the presentation. There's a link to the recording that we can send to you. You can share with colleagues or watch this later on your own if you wish. And again, just you can follow up and ask for us at the end if you want to get that link. So let's jump in. Again, the idea today is, organizations are going through transformation, and is and how and why does your project portfolio management solution or process need to help drive that change? And so before we dive into the details, we want to start with sort of the big picture, which is some statistics around why we thought this was an interesting topic for the audience today. And the first thing that jumped out is that the failure rate is really high. The bigger the transformation, the larger the scale of the project, the less it tends to deliver what was promised. And the failure rate is somewhere up around 70%. However, that in and of itself is an alarming statistic. But when you look at the bottom point here, some 85% of companies are expected to go through some sort of transformation over the next 5 years. So you've got a really high failure rate, but it's something that a lot of companies are endeavoring to do. So, clearly there's something that needs to give here. And also we felt this was a great opportunity to introduce, where and how and why PPM and the portfolio management process can assist in aiding companies to be the 30% that don't fail. So why are companies going through these transformation projects? What is forcing them into this, regardless of the rate of failure? As I mentioned, so many of you will be going through this, so many of us will be going through this in the next 5 years. And there's a couple different causes. The one that we wanted to focus on today is, we live in a world where everything's on demand. Okay, we need immediate fulfillment. Your customers, your peers, your stakeholders, the folks that you work with, everybody expects some sort of immediate fulfillment, and that pervades our society, and it impacts us on a personal level, on a work level, and on a business level, our customers, again, our colleagues and our stakeholders, through a variety of technologies, right? There's an on-demand need for information, for services, and for fulfillment, and these are pervasive. These are not going to go away. These are not going to change. And in many ways, a lot of this causes and forces the transformation that organizations embark on to change, to be more responsive to customers, digital transformation, changing the way we do business, changing the external way we interact with customers and vendors, changing the way internally that we interact with our colleagues and our peers. And again, this is one of the driving forces. And again, this is what is going to, some impact here is going to require, many of you on the webinar today and your organization to go through some large change to stay competitively positioned or to seek a competitive advantage over the competition. So this is what's driving a lot of these changes. And again, it must transform. These aren't needs to transform or nice to haves. These are must haves. And when you look at what happens, why are our organizations embarking on some of these challenges? Failure or not, at least some of them are trying. And the key is, what are they looking to do? Well, obviously they want to succeed. And as I mentioned, success in terms of transformation and the kinds of organizational transformations that we've been involved with and that we see are things like improving customer satisfaction, right? Lofty, high-level goals. Innovation in the way we bring products to market, and the way we go to market, and the way we interact with our customers. They can also have less lofty qualitative aspects and be very quantifiable, like revenue growth. And some organizational transformations obviously attempt to bridge all three of these. But the key is to continue to grow and align the projects and initiatives and programs that make up the cornerstone of an overall organizational transformation. They obviously need to align with company objectives. And here's some objectives and some examples of that. On the flip side, what happens to the organizations that fail? Well, on the one hand, failure to embark on a successful transformation or failure to even try, have different consequences. The 70-ish% that failed that we looked at, this came out of a Harvard Business Review study. There's different ways. I didn't get into the quantification here because I just think that these terms are impactful enough on their own, but it's wasted resources, right? It's things that you cannot get back. Management time coming up with these initiatives, the effort involved, obviously the money that goes into some of these projects. And I think something that's maybe often overlooked, which was a key point in this, was workforce energy, morale. Who wants to work at a company that's no longer cutting edge? Who wants to work at a company that's not as responsive as my parent-teacher council is with getting information out? Who doesn't respond to customers? If my company doesn't respond to customers the way that I shop, does it make me want to continue to work there? So I think there's also a big impact from an employee morale perspective. Employees leave and go to cool places to work, and that's kind of a fact. And so there's a lot of different things that happen if organizations embark on a transformation process and don't get there. What happens if they don't embark at all? Well, there's other consequences, and as I said, the industry is changing, the world is changing, the world has changed, and it will continue to. And Fortune did a study and came up with a number that sometime over the next 18 years, something like half of the Fortune 500 will be replaced. Huge institutions that we know of today, and many of which you can think of in the past 5 or 10 years that have been displaced by upstarts. And there's a lot of disruption in different industries. Airbnb and Uber and some of the other technologies and companies that were on the previous slide. These are all going to lead to upheaval in industries, and something like half of the biggest companies in the world will be replaced in the next 18 years. So, transformation is a must. We need to do it. It has great impact. It has a lot of negative impact if not done successfully and if not done at all. So that's the discussion we're trying to frame today with project portfolio management. So how do we get there? Well, let's take it down a little bit and look at what companies will move forward and why, and where PPM fits in. So, organizations that are looking to reinvent really can look at this a couple different ways. But to start to bring PPM into the focus here, enabling on-demand real-time information and services, both internally and externally, these all start to crystallize into projects and programs and initiatives that stakeholders and other executives in organizations will start to put in place. And some of them will have great benefits, some of them will have great risk, and other variations in there. And this is where we can start to apply the principles and the strategy and the process around portfolio management to ensuring that when my organization does make the move, when we do start to change how we're going to do business, great or small, that we've got the right initiatives in place and the right pieces and the right resources and do it in the right time. So let's take another maybe slightly deeper look at that. So the other thing is, when we start to look at these initiatives, organizational transformation has kind of a lofty title, but again, per the previous slide, quick wins, making sure that we're moving in the right direction, those are also hallmarks of it. And so as we look at the decision-making that organizations need to take, we can start to bring this down into, which projects get promoted and how we move forward through them. There's a decision-making process that needs to evolve. And we found that this is one of the key things, is that we need to make some real-time decisions about how we're moving through this process as an organization, right? The big lofty goals are still made up of individual components, and if we're not doing the right things in the right order at the right time, we need to make changes. And so the older hierarchy that you see on the right of project managers sort of having an upward view, going through individual projects and sort of just putting them in a collection of a portfolio and saying, this is what we're doing, that kind of mindset doesn't really work anymore. It's a siloed approach, and it doesn't really take into consideration all the various aspects of organizational thinking, and doesn't really support the way that companies need to move forward. So there's a new way of thinking, and you could put IT in the center of this, but really, it's a circle. It's an IT is at the center of this process, not just driving tasks through projects, but looking at all the various components of this. And stakeholders are all around you, right? A 360 degree view of people who need information. And we really classify stakeholders as anybody in the organization that needs to understand where any aspect of an initiative is at any point in time. It could be the sponsor, it could be the project manager, it could be the CEO, it could be somebody who's on the project. They all have needs for information. And again, not only does your organization need to transform to keep up with an ever-changing, knowledge-based world, but once you get into the project management process itself and the portfolio management process, those same things exist there too. You can't have people sitting on information and not making decisions till too late. So we really see this new approach as the way that organizations need to embrace in terms of how they need to execute on these strategies. Now, where does PPM come into play? Well, again, it can support and deliver this process when done effectively. So this is a change. And again, just like the status quo isn't really acceptable to a lot of companies today because the world is changing around them, the old ways of doing PPM and looking kind of that bottom up, we just have a bunch of project managers and we'll just group these into something called the portfolio. That doesn't really work either. We can't go through and start to look at projects subjectively. Hey, let's do this. This will get us towards our goals. Doing things where we're losing track of data or not able to keep track of things on a real-time basis. Being very reactive. Well, we're going to be late next week, so let's pull somebody off this project and put them on another project. You need to be very proactive. And ultimately, project management is not just in portfolio management and a PMO office, if your organization has one, or IT in general, are not just the only folks looking at these initiatives. This is moving beyond server maintenance and other infrastructure things to really top-down changes, and those stakeholders are throughout the organization. So, how can we move the PPM process, the project portfolio management process, from this left way of thinking to the right side to help support organizational transformation? And that's really the key. So what specifically does PPM play in this? So the first thing is that when done correctly, portfolio management will bridge the gap, right? If your portfolio management process is top down, is taking these strategies, breaking them into components, and ensuring that any initiative that's undertaken supports one of these or a component of this strategy, that gap between strategy and implementation will be fulfilled by a robust PPM process. Additionally, centralized management of projects with the different objectives you have. If you're prioritizing amongst things that all have a strategic value, it's a much easier way to go through the management of the portfolio with these top-down initiatives in terms of driving decision making, as opposed to whatever's easiest or most convenient down at the project level. There really does need to be that portfolio level concept in between, and whether things are then broken down further into programs or simply into projects, that gets into a little bit more of a tactical way to do it, but it will be that centralized management layer to ensure that all the projects that support a particular program, are done together and on time. And finally, the selection. organizational transformation will result in a variety of initiatives being proposed, along with additional initiatives that are part and parcel of IT or whoever is managing this project, this particular project. And this will give you a foundation, a proper portfolio management process will give you things like selection and prioritization to make sure that you can leverage which initiatives you do in what order, and again, ensure the success around the execution of that. So to get into some specific capabilities, again, in order to be this bridge between high-level strategies and the projects that make them up, things that a project portfolio management process, tool, group of people need to be able to do is, need to have a solution that people can work with, that can scale up and scale down with functionality as the business needs it, be easy to use when it needs to be easy, but also have enterprise capabilities. We are big proponents of cloud-based solutions specifically for this. As you get into strategic initiatives, you get into, and again, supporting real-time need for information. You need to have something that people can just quickly log into and see regardless of where they are, whether they're in multiple offices or whether they're traveling or whether they're just across the hall. We see the cloud as being something that really supports dynamic enterprise and these kinds of changes. Additionally, from a portfolio management perspective, some of the key things that, again, from a capabilities piece that really brings benefit, that drives aligning PPM with these strategies, are things like, can you support a life cycle of projects? Can you understand where they are along the way? Can you score initiatives to ensure that the right ones are moving through the right stage gates or agile framework or whatever your underlying delivery process is or methodology? Do you have a way to ensure that the right projects are being done at the right time? And then do you have a combination of both top-down and bottom-up metrics that you can use to measure, be proactive, and also support stakeholders? And ultimately, what we want to pull all these things together is really to deliver value, right? Ultimately, the portfolio and this organizational transformation need to ultimately deliver value to your organization. So the strategic alignment, but done in a way that supports governance and transparency, ensuring that there's a rigorous process in place, ensuring that any stakeholder at any point can understand why a project is at a certain place, what resources have been on it, why it was scored, why it's on hold, why it's the first one in the queue, et cetera. Having a richly defined process helps with governance and transparency. Everything is done from a quantitative, measurable perspective around a set of criteria. These are the key strategies the company's going to embark on. This is how we measure risk and reward of specific initiatives to support those. It's all there for everybody to see. And so this ultimate collection of features and capabilities, we at Projector call portfolio intelligence, making sure that you've got the right understanding of what is happening across the portfolio, not just at a project basis. So one of the things I wanted to do before we get a little too far in here is just maybe take a quick poll. I've been speaking for about 15 minutes. I want to jump into the poll and get a sense of where organizations are with their process. So let's talk a little bit about the organizational strategy that you have. I'm just going to go ahead and launch the poll. I want to gather this information, get it across everybody attending, and I'll share the results. But I'm curious to know from an organizational transformation, is there a strategy in place today, currently doing something? We're deep in it. We're planning on doing it. We're already done with it. And, we don't have one at all. And maybe the information in this presentation is valuable to kind of push that forward. So go ahead and get these results here. Looks like everybody's kind of in the middle, planning on it or currently in it. I'll go ahead and wait another few seconds and we'll close this poll up. And all right, we'll go ahead and close it. And we'll just quickly share that with everyone. So again, 3/4 of you are planning on some kind of transformation, large scale transformation, and 25% of you are in the midst of it right now. All right, let me go ahead and hide that and we'll hop back in here. So just to maybe give some visualization around some of the capabilities that we have. What do we mean by some of these particular pieces? Project scoring and prioritization, what is it? I mean, it could be everything from a high, medium, low capability to a more advanced weighted scoring mechanism across a variety of measures. But regardless, do you have some way to look at, okay, we want to become more green, we want to be more responsive to the customer, we want to enable seamless information sharing across the organization. The different initiatives to get there's many ways to get there. No one hands you a roadmap, and one of the things that you can use PPM for is to just simply look at, well, what are the rewards and risks of specific initiatives, whether this at the project or program level, to help me determine and help us determine as an organization where we need to start, which paths are better suited for our organization from a risk reward perspective. Other examples of PPM supporting this is, once we start to go through this, where are we? How close to the end of this process are we getting? It will obviously typically consist of multiple projects. Do we have a life cycle that we put them in? Some of them are just beginning, some are close to ending. Are there dependencies or relationships? We can't start this project until this one is done. Just a top-down view of where things are. And again, I think this helps folks understand exactly where they are along the specific execution of individual tasks. Resource management, obviously, ultimately it comes down to people, assets, money being used to deliver and complete certain initiatives. And so, whether it's at a project basis, I mean, this is a Gantt chart view, which everybody's familiar with, but are there ways to look at how your resources are being deployed, ensure that they're being deployed to their fullest extent, and ensure that you can proactively get in front of resource constraints, whether it's people are overbooked, resources are not available a particular week, certain assets are being deployed, that might need to be shared amongst a group. How are we looking from a budgetary perspective? All those things can be answered with a strong PPM process, which again can help enable and ensure the success of this kind of initiative. And ultimately, all these projects embark. I think one of the key things that we also took from the data when we went through to pull together some different things for this is it's not just failure. Some of the failure is simply, I don't know, which in the study that we brought up at the beginning is, if you don't know how the project did, then it has to be called a failure versus a success. And part of that is just the inability at certain stages along the way to measure how successful certain initiatives were. And so do you have the ability, this just looks at a simple across different initiatives, what we actually got out of it and what we expected. Cost versus revenue, however you want to measure that. Did the projects deliver what they thought they would? And many of these organizational transformation initiatives take place over months, quarters, years, and some of them have very long-term goals and benefits in mind. And so do you have an application and a process in place to help you put together those numbers and have ultimately the data that you need to support, was this a successful strategy that we went down or not? So these are just a few examples of different things and what they might look like. To summarize, again, if you look at 85% are doing it or going to do it, and 70% of those are going to fail, that takes you somewhere in the overall 60% of organizational transformations result in failure. Ultimately, we believe strongly that a good project portfolio management process can help guide you, the individual, you on the webinar today, your department and your organization, to identifying the very best options. This is really the key part of this, the very best options to align your strategy to the individual initiatives. And ultimately, the PPM process can support the process and help organizations by growing. Wanted to just bring up one last poll question, and then I want to, as I bring this out, I want to sort through all the questions that have come in to make sure that we've got a few minutes left to answer them. But the last poll I wanted to launch here is just simply the process that you have in place today. Where do you think it fits into some of what we just spoke about? Is it, we don't have a PPM process. We have one, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not robust enough to support the different strategic initiatives that we're looking for. Or I went through this webinar and ticked every box and, we're good and we're moving in the right direction. So I'll go ahead and leave this open for another minute. I just want to pull together some of the questions that came in and share those with everybody. So I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds. All right. So I'll close this and I'll share the results, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A piece. So about half and half. You know, I don't think, you know, and this is fairly common. I mean, a lot of what we hear, and the reason Projectric is here is because many times organizations don't have a process in place that aligns everything with the strategy and has that top-down alignment, you know, that we think is important. And so, you know, half don't have a good process or strategy in place, and about half of you have one, but doesn't necessarily have the support for the strategy that we've articulated here. So great, and thanks for sharing that. So Q&A, there were a couple questions that came in. I just wanted to run through these quickly. I'll just take the three I think are really appropriate to everybody in the audience. You know, we struggle to align, you know, projects to a corporate strategy. So, you know, help me out here. And again, we covered it a little bit. Happy to take this offline and follow up in detail. But again, I think if you've got a clearly articulated corporate strategy and you look at and prioritize projects with those strategy components in mind, and can use that to measure either quantitatively or qualitatively, and assign that to individual projects and initiatives, that's a big help in making sure that, you know, executive mandates are represented through which projects are initiated in what order and why. Another question, you know, corporate strategy happens outside of the IT, you know, PMO where I work. We just have to do the projects. I don't see how we are responsible for you know, for ensuring that they're strategic enough. And I think that that's the case. I think something, again, with a robust PPM process and solution, and you can start to use data to support your concepts of, you know, if you can score the projects before they're put into place, or even do it as a little bit of a check, I think, you know, IT and the project management process can start to get a seat at the table of being involved in these corporate and strategic decisions. And the last question, will PPM deliver the strategy or merely help execute? So it's a great question. I think it's maybe a different side of the same coin I just spoke about. I think you can use it to help define the strategy over time, because you can start to gather data and results from some of these initiatives and use some of the hindsight analysis that we presented at the very end. If you have a series of initiatives meant to generate interest, and the individual projects aren't delivering on what was expected, you'll start to gather that data prior to the end of probably the entire strategic transformation process, and you can use that to help maybe reframe and guide the strategy and use that in the future. You know, one of the things that we're big proponents of is gathering information about every initiative and every project that you can, whether they were put into place, put on hold, canceled, or completed. All of that data and that hindsight analysis can really help drive where an organization moves. And so I think, yeah, for sure, it will help execute projects, but I also think that if you have enough data, you can help drive a strategy as well, because you're doing it from a strategic, data-driven point of view, as opposed to a qualitative point of view. Let me see, there's one more question that came in. Yeah, so there were a couple other questions that came in. We got to 2:30. There are some things that I'll hop off with. Everybody that asked questions that we didn't cover, I'll follow up with individually for sure, via email, to make sure that we answer these, because there's a bunch of them and I don't want to go over, and some of them are specific, but they're all great. So I appreciate everybody's time. I guess I would leave you with the call to action of, if you want to see a little bit more about how Projectric helps organizations align with this strategy and see a little bit more about some of the specific initiatives that we're able to put in place, you can reach out to us at projectric.com/demo. Happy to set up a demo and walk through this, maybe provide some specific examples, either for your industry or obviously for the specific organizational challenges that you have. But very happy everybody joined. Thanks everybody for your time. We do webinars about every 2 weeks, so we'll look forward to seeing you at a presentation in the future. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Have a great weekend.